I need the money tomorrow. Those were the first words out of my daughter's mouth. Not hello, not how are you, not even the bare courtesy of acknowledging that I am her mother, the woman who carried her in my body, the woman who has broken her back over decades to give her everything she ever wanted. No. The first thing out of her painted lips, sharpened with entitlement and arrogance, was an order. An order. To me. Her mother. She shoved papers in my hand like I was her secretary, like I was some clerk behind a counter whose only job was to obey, to sign, to pay. My daughter, my flesh and blood, looked me dead in the eyes and told me I had until tomorrow to hand over $500,000. $500,000. And then her husband, that arrogant parasite she married, that man who drained her of every ounce of innocence she once had, stepped forward with his smug little grin and added, and no delays. I swear to you, the blood in my veins boiled hotter than fire in that moment. I felt it rising in my chest, pressing against my throat like it wanted to claw its way out as a scream. My daughter, my only daughter, ordering me as though I were nothing more than an ATM with a heartbeat. And him, who has never known the dignity of earning an honest dollar, snapping his fingers like I was his servant. I smiled. I smiled the kind of smile that holds back oceans of rage, a smile carved from stone, a smile that comes not from joy but from the deepest pit of contempt. And I said one word. One simple word that they thought was surrender, but was in fact the sharpening of my blade. I said, okay. They had no idea what was burning behind that smile. They didn't see the decades of exhaustion, the years of sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the countless times I pulled them out of ruin while they spat in my face. They didn't hear the pounding in my ears, the voice screaming inside me, no more. No more. No more. For hours later, while they were no doubt laughing at how easy it had been to bend me to their will once again, I was at the airport. Gone without a trace. Gone without warning. They thought I would spend the night breaking myself apart to save them. But I had already saved them too many times. This time, I saved myself. And when they came back to my house, my sanctuary that had been turned into their feeding ground, they did not find me waiting at the door with a check. They did not find a trembling mother ready to give in one last time. No, they found silence. They found the front door locked. And on the table, they found a box. A simple box. But inside it was the weight of truth, the ledger of every betrayal, the record of every dollar wasted, every manipulation, every threat. Inside that box was not money. It was everything they never wanted to face. And when they opened it, when their greedy hands tore it apart expecting salvation, what they found instead was damnation. And they screamed. They screamed not because they were in pain, but because the illusion had shattered. They screamed because the free ride was over. They screamed because, for the first time in their lives, they were looking into the mirror of their own making. Before I go further, before I peel back every rotten layer of this story, I want you to do something. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and write in the comments what time it is where you are watching from. I want you to remember where you were and what time it was when you heard the story, because you will never forget it. It is not just a story about betrayal. It is not just a story about money. It is a story about a mother who finally said enough. Do you know what it feels like to raise a child from infancy? To hold their tiny body against your chest, to promise them silently that you will protect them against the world, that you will give them more than you ever had? I do. I know that feeling. I poured every ounce of myself into that girl. I clothed her, I fed her, I sent her to the best schools. I stood at every recital, every graduation, every moment of her life where she demanded applause. And I gave it. I gave it all. I gave her my life, my youth, my fortune, my soul. And in return? In return, I raised a daughter who would stand in my living room, eyes cold, lips tight, voice sharp, and tell me that I owed her husband $500,000. You cannot understand the rage of a mother until you have lived that moment. You cannot understand the pain until the child you bled for, The child you built your world around looks at you not as a mother, not as family, but as a resource to exploit. I sat there, staring at them both. My daughter, whose eyes once lit up with innocence, now hollow with greed. Her husband, leaning back in my chair, tapping his foot, looking around my house as though he already owned it. They thought they had cornered me. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my forced smile meant defeat. But let me tell you something. The silence of a mother is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the sound of calculation. Sometimes it is the moment before the storm, the moment when the blade is drawn in the dark. So yes, I smiled. And yes, I said, okay. But inside, I was saying goodbye. Goodbye to the years of bending, the years of bleeding for people who only knew how to take. Goodbye to the daughter I once thought I had, the daughter who no longer existed. Goodbye to the role of the rescuer, the savior, the fool. They had no idea that as they walked out of my house that night, laughing at their victory, I was already planning my disappearance. They had no idea that by the time they returned the next day, I would be gone. They had no idea that the box waiting for them would not hold deliverance, but judgment. Do you hear the pain in my voice? Do you hear the fury buried in every word? That is the fury of betrayal. That is the fury of a mother who has been stripped of her illusions. I am not telling you this because it is easy. I am telling you this because it is the only way to bleed out the poison that has been festering in me for years. And let me tell you, that night, as I packed my bags, as I gathered my documents, as I placed folder after folder into that simple cardboard box, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt alive. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to save someone else. I was preparing to save myself. I can still picture it. The papers spread across my desk, each one a scar in ink and numbers. The deeds to their house that I had quietly kept in my name. The receipts of every loan that was never repaid. The signed agreements from their past failed ventures. The screenshots of their mockery, their messages calling me pathetic, calling me weak. Every page was a testament to how they had leached off me. And I bound it all together with one thought. You wanted $500,000? Here is the real debt. Here is the real bill. Pay it with your shame. And then I set the box aside. And I packed my suitcase. And when I zipped it closed, it felt like zipping shut a coffin, the coffin of the old me, the me who said yes too many times, the me who was nothing more than a wallet in human skin. By the time dawn broke, I was gone. And they were still dreaming, still confident in their lies. They had no idea that the world they built on my sacrifices was about to crumble. So let me say it again, slowly, so it burns in your memory. My daughter ordered me for $500,000. Her husband snapped at me like a dog demanding scraps. I smiled, I said okay, and 4 hours later I was gone. And when they came for the money, they found a locked door, a silent house, and a box that screamed louder than I ever could. And when they opened it, when they saw what was inside, they screamed, and the sound of it was sweeter than any apology I will never receive. It was almost midnight when I heard the first knock. Not gentle, not hesitant. It was sharp, demanding. 3 quick, deliberate knocks that echoed through my hallway like judgment. I already knew who it was. I didn't even need to look through the window. There's a rhythm you never forget, the rhythm of your own child's arrival. Except this wasn't the soft, uncertain knock of a daughter coming home. This was the pounding of someone who felt entitled to entry, as though the house and everything inside it already belonged to her. I looked around my living room before opening the door. Everything was still, the photographs, the trophies, the antique clock I'd bought when times were good. The air carried the smell of bourbon and silence. The same silence I'd grown to love since my husband died, the silence of finally not having to justify my existence to anyone. And yet, that silence was about to be broken by the very person I once swore I would protect with my life. When I opened the door, there she was, my daughter, Emily, my only child. She stood there under the porch light, her face sculpted by vanity and exhaustion. Every inch of her radiated tension. Her lips pressed tight, her eyes painted with impatience instead of love. She wasn't alone. Behind her, like a shadow that refused to fade, stood her husband, Jason, tall, smug, with the kind of confidence only failure can give a man who's never had to pay for his mistakes. "Mother," she said, voice trembling in that rehearsed way she always used when she wanted something. I didn't answer. I simply moved aside, letting the doors swing open, motioning them in. I was raised to be hospitable, even to my enemies, even when my enemy wore my daughter's face. As they walked in, I could almost feel the temperature drop. That house, my house, had always been warm. It was the kind of home that smelled of old books, cinnamon, and time. Every corner held a memory. Every photo on the wall whispered a chapter of love and survival. But that night, it all felt foreign. Those same pictures now mocked me. Emily at 5 years old, holding a pink balloon, missing her front teeth. Emily at 17, in her prom dress, laughing with the kind of joy that only youth can afford. Emily at 25, walking down the aisle while I cried tears of pride. Every image on that wall was a ghost, a cruel reminder of what she used to be and what she had become. Jason brushed past me without a word, straight to the armchair that used to belong to my late husband. He sat there like a king, crossing his legs, scrolling through his phone as if my living room were his office. That small act, the way he claimed space, told me everything I needed to know. This visit wasn't about family. It was about business. It was about taking. Emily placed her handbag, a $5,000 designer piece I had foolishly gifted her last Christmas, on my table, right beside my unpaid bills. She looked around like a stranger visiting a museum, like she was trying to remember the value of things she once took for granted. When her eyes landed on the photo of me and her father on our wedding day, she looked away, as though the memory of love embarrassed her. "You've been drinking again," she said softly, but there was no concern in her tone. Just judgment. Just distance. Just that quiet superiority she'd learned from the man standing behind her. "I drink less than you lie," I wanted to say. But I didn't. I just stared at her, letting the silence fill the room like smoke. Jason was the one who finally spoke. He didn't bother with small talk. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, not even looking at me. That voice of his, confident, rehearsed, dripping with arrogance, filled the space like poison. He laid out documents on the table, as if this was a negotiation, not a shakedown. My daughter adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck, another gift, another reminder of my stupidity. She only ever touched that necklace when she wanted to soften me. It was her tell. And seeing her do it now filled me with both sorrow and disgust. She started with the same lines she always used. "Mom, you know we wouldn't come if it wasn't serious. You've always said family comes first. You know we'd never ask if we weren't desperate." Every word was a dagger coated in sweetness. Every syllable was a manipulation dressed as affection. I've heard those lines so many times they've lost their meaning. Family comes first. They only say that when they're standing behind you, ready to stab. Jason spread the papers wider. Contracts. Debts. Investments. He spoke in numbers, percentages, and urgency. He was good at pretending to be legitimate, good at disguising desperation as opportunity. He called it a temporary setback. I called it what it really was, failure. Emily's eyes darted between me and him like a performer checking her cue. Her voice trembled just enough to seem human. "Mom, please, you know how hard things have been. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, the economy." I wanted to laugh. The economy? They lived in a 5-bedroom house, drove luxury cars, and vacationed twice a year. There was no economy problem. There was an ego problem. I stared at them, feeling something inside me crack. Not break, crack. Like a dam beginning to split. All the memories flooded back at once. The time I paid for their wedding. The time I covered their down payment. The countless times I bailed them out after each failed business venture. And each time, they promised it was the last. Each time, I believed them. I remembered the night I mortgaged my retirement fund to save them from foreclosure. I remembered the morning I skipped my medication because I had to send them money for urgent repairs. I remembered how many times I told myself it was what a good mother does. And now here they were, demanding $500,000 like it was my duty. My duty. I felt something rising in my chest, not fear, not sadness, but fury. The kind of fury that comes from years of being silent. The kind of fury that doesn't explode, it burns quietly, deeply, completely. Jason finally looked at me, smirking. It's not that much for someone of your assets. My assets. He said it like I was a portfolio, not a person. Like everything I've ever earned, built, or loved was somehow theirs by default. My daughter reached for my hand. Her nails were painted the color of blood. She tried to cry, I saw her forcing it, but not a single tear fell. She was still playing her part. Still hoping to manipulate me with that broken little girl act that used to work when she was 5. For the first time in my life, I saw her clearly. Not as my baby, not as my blood, but as a stranger wearing my daughter's face. And I knew right there, in that dimly lit room surrounded by lies, that something inside me was done. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't plead for them to see what they were doing. No, I just watched them. I watched them poison my house with their greed, and I felt my heart go cold. The air grew heavy. The clock ticked louder. The bourbon glass in my hand trembled slightly. But I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. Awake in a way I hadn't been in years. When Jason stood to refill his glass from my bar, using my whiskey, I knew the scene was complete. The parasites had arrived, and the host had finally realized she was dying. I turned toward the window. Outside, the night was quiet. The neighborhood peaceful. The moonlight fell across the driveway where my daughter's luxury car gleamed, a car I had bought. Everything about that moment screamed irony. They were drowning in debt, yet still wrapped in comfort that I had provided. And somehow, I was the one they looked to for salvation. When I turned back to them, they were waiting like wolves waiting for the rabbit to stop running. I looked my daughter in the eye and I said, calm and clear, "Fine. Tomorrow." Her face softened instantly. Relief washed over her. She smiled, that fake smile of victory. She thought she had won again. And her husband smirked, raising his glass like a toast to their success. They walked out of that house with their heads high, hand in hand, smug and satisfied. They didn't know that they had just witnessed my last lie. They didn't know that the word tomorrow wasn't a promise, it was a deadline. When the door closed behind them, I stood there in the silence they left behind. The smell of Jason's cologne lingered like infection. The memory of Emily's voice echoed like a curse. And the walls around me, those walls that had seen laughter, birthdays, family dinners, felt empty, stripped of meaning. I stared at her childhood photo one last time. The little girl with the toothless grin, holding a doll, smiling at her mother as if I hung the stars. And I whispered to that memory, "She's gone now. You don't know who she became." But I do. That night, my house wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. And I, the victim who finally decided to stop playing dead. When morning came, I sat in the living room staring at the spot where they had stood the night before. The coffee table still carried the faint smudge of his fingerprints, the faint perfume trail of her desperation. You would think a mother's anger fades after sleep, but not that night. It fermented. It grew heavier, darker, and more potent. By sunrise, it had turned into something else entirely, not rage, not sorrow, but a kind of frozen clarity. I spent the morning doing what I'd always done when I felt too much, cleaning. It was almost ritualistic. I picked up the empty glass Jason had left behind, still stained with my best whiskey. I wiped the coasters, straightened the stack of magazines, dusted the frames. It's funny how you can pretend you're scrubbing the room, when what you're really doing is trying to scrub the memories. Everywhere I looked, there was a reminder. That clock on the wall, the one I bought the year she graduated, ticked mockingly, as if counting the seconds until the next betrayal. The couch, still bearing the faint imprint of where she'd sat, looked like a grave for trust. And the silence. God, the silence was loud. By afternoon, they were back. The same knock. The same entitled rhythm. 3 sharp raps that said, "We're here." Open the door. Obey. I didn't even hesitate. I opened it because I wanted to see their faces again. I wanted to see how low they could go. Emily stepped in first, her smile already fixed in that plastic expression she'd perfected over the years. Behind her, Jason carried a manila folder under his arm, his posture tense with false confidence. They didn't even bother pretending this was a visit. No hugs, no pleasantries. Just business. My daughter spoke first. Her tone was rehearsed, dripping with a sweetness so artificial it made my skin crawl. "Mom, I just wanted to say thank you for agreeing last night. We knew you'd understand. You've always done what's right for the family." I just stared at her. It was like watching a stranger wear my daughter's face as a mask. She kept talking, every word digging deeper into my chest. "You've always said love is about sacrifice. And we're just asking you to do what you've always done. Help us. Help us." Those 2 words had become her anthem, her excuse for every mistake, her justification for every wound she ever inflicted on me. "Help us, Mom. We're struggling. Help us, Mom. You have the money. Help us, Mom. You'll get it back." But the truth was simple, I never got it back. Not the money. Not the respect. Not the love. Jason sat down without invitation, tossed the folder onto the coffee table, and leaned back in my late husband's chair like a man who thought he owned the air he breathed. He began talking numbers again, $500,000 here, returns there, high interest, tight deadlines, and connections that sounded more like threats than opportunities. He had the audacity to look me in the eye and say, "This is the last time we'll need your help." He'd said that before. 3 times to be exact. Every last time had become another chain around my neck. I let them talk. I wanted to see how far they'd go, how deep their entitlement ran. I wanted to hear the words that would finally destroy whatever illusion remained in my heart. And then Emily said it. She looked at me, her voice trembling just enough to sound human. "Mom, we're family. Family comes first." That line, that one line, broke something in me that had been fragile for years. Family comes first. She used my own words against me. Words I had once whispered to her when she scraped her knees, when she cried after her first heartbreak, when she was scared of the world. Words meant to comfort. Now twisted into a weapon to extract money. Family comes first. Do you know how cruel that sounds when the person saying it has already forgotten what family means? When family is just a tool for manipulation, a name used to justify greed. My hands clenched around my glass. I could feel my pulse in my palms, pounding in rhythm with the rage in my chest. I kept quiet, though. I didn't want them to hear the storm brewing behind my calm expression. Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice lowering to a tone meant to intimidate. "You know these aren't bank people we're dealing with, ma'am. They're serious. They want their money by tomorrow. You don't want this getting messy. Not with your reputation. Not with the dealerships. Not at your age. At my age." That phrase landed like an insult. At my age, I should know my place. At my age, I should hand over my hard-earned life savings to a parasite in a tailored suit. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered what my daughter saw in him. But I knew the answer. He was everything she'd been taught to admire: charm without depth, ambition without effort, confidence without integrity. And I had been the one to teach her that wealth was worth more than wisdom. I had given her that poison without realizing it. She was my reflection, not of who I was, but of my mistakes. Her voice broke through my thoughts again, softer now, pleading. "Mom, you know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Please, think of the kids. They'll lose their school. Think of us. Think of us." As if I hadn't thought of them every single day of my life. as if I hadn't already bled myself dry for their comfort. I looked at her hands, perfectly manicured, shaking slightly, and I realized she wasn't nervous about losing her home or her husband. She was nervous about losing control over me. Something inside me shifted. Not in anger this time, but in understanding. I saw it all for what it was. Not love. Not family. A transaction. Every memory, every phone call, every visit, all of it had been transactions disguised as affection. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, to ask her where that little girl had gone, the one who used to climb into my bed after nightmares, who used to cry when she thought I was sad. But that girl was gone. In her place stood a woman I didn't recognize. When Jason poured himself another drink without asking, I felt the heat crawl up my neck. He spoke casually, as if we were discussing the weather. You have the funds. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. Complicated. That's what they called it, my refusal to finance their addiction to comfort. Complicated. My daughter wiped her eyes, trying to summon tears that weren't there. And then she said it, the sentence that ended the illusion forever. If Mom were still alive, she'd be ashamed of you. She said it knowing it would wound me, knowing it would reach into the one place she thought still had compassion left. But what she didn't know was that the woman she once called Mom had already died, not physically, but piece by piece, with every betrayal, every manipulation, every demand. I stood there, feeling the words echo inside me. Ashamed of me? No, my child. She'd be ashamed of what you've become. I set my glass down carefully. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From control. From restraint. I looked at Jason first. You think you can threaten me with my own reputation? You think I care what anyone at that country club thinks of me? Let me tell you something. The only people who ever cared about appearances were the ones drowning in lies. He blinked, momentarily thrown off by my tone. Then he laughed, that hollow laugh of a man who doesn't understand danger until it's standing right in front of him. I turned to my daughter. I've given you everything. Every opportunity, every comfort, every privilege. And what have you given me in return? Silence when I was sick. Distance when I was lonely. And now this. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. No, don't. I don't want your excuses. I don't want your stories. You've built your whole life on my back, and now you're trying to bury me under it. For a moment, just one fleeting moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, fear. Not of losing the money, but of losing her power over me. And that's when I decided. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg them to remember who I was. I would let them walk out believing they'd won. Because the sweetest revenge is silence. The kind that doesn't explain, doesn't justify, doesn't announce. The kind that simply vanishes. I leaned back in my chair, meeting their expectant stares. And I said, fine. Tomorrow. You'll have what you need. They both exhaled at once, like prisoners released. My daughter smiled, the victory already glistening in her eyes. Jason stood, straightened his jacket, and extended his hand as if we'd just finalized a business deal. I didn't take it. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, leaning forward to kiss my cheek. But I didn't move. I let her lips touch cold air. When the door finally closed behind them, the weight of years lifted from my chest. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a mother reborn not from love, but from the ashes of betrayal. Tomorrow, they would come for the money. Tomorrow, they would find something else entirely. Tomorrow, the world they'd built on lies would begin to collapse. And tomorrow, for the first time in decades, I would breathe freely. The door clicked shut behind them, and the echo lingered long after they were gone. It was a strange kind of silence, not peaceful, not comforting, but cleansing. It was the silence of realization, of acceptance, of finality. The kind that fills your chest like cold air after years of suffocating under warmth that was never real. I stood in that silence for a long time. I could still feel the ghost of their presence, the scent of his cologne, the echo of her voice. I imagined their car driving away, headlights slicing through the darkness, her laughter soft but sharp, his voice arrogant as ever. They thought they had me again. They thought I would cave like always. They thought I would spend the night wiring money, making calls, begging banks, pulling miracles out of exhaustion. They didn't know. They didn't know that something inside me had already died long before that conversation ended. And what was left, the woman standing there in that quiet house, was not the same mother they thought they could manipulate. I walked slowly to my study. Every step on the wooden floor echoed like a drumbeat. I switched on the lamp, and the warm light fell across the stacks of files, envelopes, and letters. So many years of my life had been documented in paper. Every sacrifice, every signature, every bailout, every lie I had agreed to just to keep the illusion of family alive. I pulled open a drawer and stared at the neat rows of folders labeled with their names: Emily and Jason, Loan Agreement 2020, House Transfer Westlake, Investment Support 2022. Each label was a scar. Each folder was a wound. I sat down at the desk and opened the first one. Receipts. Contracts. Every check I'd ever written for them was there, every temporary favor that had turned permanent. I ran my fingers over the papers, over the signatures, mine steady, theirs lazy and careless. They had signed so many promises and broken every one of them. My eyes burned, but I wasn't crying. No, the time for tears had long passed. This wasn't grief anymore. This was reckoning. I pulled out a small cardboard box from under the desk. It was nothing special, an old Amazon box I had kept from a recent delivery. Ordinary. Disposable. But tonight, it would become something sacred, an altar of truth. A collection of evidence, of justice, of finality. I began to fill it. One by one, I placed the documents inside. The signed agreements they thought I'd forgotten. The legal papers showing that their house was still in my name. The proof of the down payments, the transfers, the investments that had all gone sour. The photos from social media, the vacations they'd taken on the same weekends they'd called me crying about overdue bills. The receipts from luxury stores that matched the dates of their emergency loans. Every piece of hypocrisy, every act of greed, every manipulation, it all went into that box. And then I added one more thing. A note. Just a small piece of paper, folded neatly, placed right on top. It read, "You wanted money. Here's what it cost." I closed the box, taped it shut, and set it on the table near the front door. Tomorrow, they would come. And that box would be waiting silent, patient, damning. I poured myself a drink, not to celebrate, not to mourn, but to study the shaking in my hands. The bourbon burned my throat, but it didn't hurt. It grounded me. It reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of making choices that belonged to me. For years, I had been reacting, always reacting. To their needs, their crises, their chaos. Every phone call from her number had been another alarm bell, another emergency I was expected to fix. But now, for the first time, I was acting. Not out of guilt. Not out of love. Out of necessity. Out of survival. I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. James Walker, attorney. My oldest friend, my most loyal witness. When he answered, his voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that never flinched in a storm. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He just replied, "I'll finalize the transfer first thing in the morning." We'd been preparing for this moment for months, maybe even years, though I hadn't admitted it to myself. Legal restructuring, property locks, account freezes, all waiting in the background like loaded weapons. I had let them think they were safe while I quietly built my escape. When I hung up, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. A stillness I hadn't felt in decades. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. Outside, the night was thick and unmoving. I sat there, staring at my packed box, and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was empty in the best way. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. In my bedroom, the moonlight stretched across the floor in silver lines. I started packing a suitcase, just one. Clothes, documents, medication, passport, a few photographs. I wasn't running. No, running implies fear. This was retreat, liberation, resurrection. Every item I folded felt symbolic. A fresh start. A quiet declaration that I owed no one anything. The more I packed, the lighter I felt. For years, I had lived buried under debt that wasn't mine, emotional debt, financial debt, moral debt. And now I was paying it off in the only currency that mattered, my absence. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I walked to the dresser and picked up a picture frame. It was of Emily at 10 years old, smiling, gap-toothed, covered in ice cream. I stared at it for a long time. She looked so innocent, so unspoiled, so pure. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Because that little girl had been real. That little girl had existed before the greed, before the manipulation, before the poison took hold. But she was gone now. And the woman who stood in her place had buried her with her own hands. I whispered into the quiet, "Goodbye, my love. You won't find me this time." Downstairs, I double-checked everything. The lights were off, the alarm was set, the box stood waiting by the door like a sentinel. I could almost hear it whispering to me, "You've done enough." I looked around one last time. Every corner of that house held a memory, some beautiful, some haunting. The kitchen where I used to bake her birthday cakes. The living room where we watched old movies and fell asleep on the couch. The staircase she used to race up in pigtails, calling for me to chase her. It was all there, frozen in time, trapped in the amber of nostalgia. But I couldn't live inside those memories anymore. They were ghosts, and I had spent too long trying to feed them. I turned toward the front door, my suitcase in hand. The clock struck midnight. 12 low chimes echoed through the house, and each one felt like a heartbeat counting down to freedom. When the last chime faded, I whispered, "It's done." I took my phone, opened my email, and sent one final message to my business manager. Subject line, temporary leave. Message, family emergency. Jake will handle operations. No contact until further notice. Then I deleted every thread with Emily's name. Every photo, every voicemail, every memory stored in pixels. They all went into the digital trash, and I emptied it without hesitation. My phone buzzed once, a text from her. "Love you, Mom. See you tomorrow. Don't forget." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I powered off the phone and placed it face down on the counter. Let her wait for an answer that will never come. Outside, the air was crisp and cold. The night sky was cloudless, full of stars that didn't care about my pain. I rolled the suitcase down the driveway, each wheel clicking softly against the concrete. The neighborhood was asleep, unaware that the woman walking away was shedding her skin. Every step took me further from who I had been. By the time I reached the car, my hands were steady. I placed the suitcase in the trunk, closed it gently, and looked back at the house one last time. The windows reflected the moonlight, empty and quiet. It was no longer my home. It was their stage, and the curtain had fallen. Tomorrow, they would come for their $500,000. They would find an empty house and a box full of truth. And by the time they opened it, I would already be gone. Flying toward peace, toward anonymity, toward the life I should have lived years ago. I started the car, and the engine purred like a whisper of freedom. My heart didn't race. It didn't ache. It just beat steady, sure, alive. As I drove down the street, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Some things are not meant to be watched as they burn. The morning air hit me like forgiveness. Cold, sharp, honest. It didn't ask for explanations. It didn't need them. It simply wrapped around me as if to say, "You made it this far, don't turn back now." I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the car. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, trembling not from fear, but from disbelief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing toward something. I was leaving it behind. And that difference was liberation. The sky was still gray, streaked with the early blush of dawn. I drove slowly, past the familiar houses, past the mailbox I'd painted 20 years ago, past the oak tree where Emily had once tied her ribbons and made wishes. I remembered her little voice back then, whispering, "Mom, I hope I grow up to be just like you." I used to think that was a blessing. Now I knew it was a curse. The streets were empty. My headlights sliced through the fog, and I realized how quiet everything was. No traffic, no neighbors walking dogs, no laughter, no demands. Just silence. A silence I had earned. I reached the freeway entrance and took one last look at the town behind me. My life, my memories, my pain, all of it shrinking in the rearview mirror. Then I pressed my foot on the gas and merged onto the highway. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was hypnotic. Mile by mile, I was shedding the ghosts. I didn't cry. Not then. I had done enough crying for a lifetime. My tears had built empires for people who never once deserved them. Now they were dry, buried under layers of resolve. Every mile felt like another page of a chapter closing. I whispered to myself, "You're not running away. You're walking out of your own prison." Because that's what motherhood had become for me, a prison built from guilt and duty. And I had decorated my cell with framed memories and fake smiles. I had mistaken captivity for purpose. As the sun began to rise, the light poured through the windshield like a slow baptism. For a brief second, I let myself feel it, the warmth, the possibility. Maybe there was still something left for me. Maybe there was still a version of me that could exist without serving, without sacrificing, without begging to be seen. I pulled into a small roadside diner just outside the city. It was one of those places where time seemed to stop, peeling paint, faded curtains, the smell of burnt coffee that had soaked into the walls. I ordered breakfast I didn't want, black coffee and toast, and sat by the window, watching strangers rush through their mornings. There was a couple sitting across from me. A young man and woman, maybe in their 20s. They were arguing, but quietly, the kind of argument that still carried affection. I watched them and wondered if Emily and Jason had ever looked like that once, before greed consumed them. Before love turned into leverage. The waitress brought my coffee, and as I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, I felt something heavy inside me shift, guilt. Guilt, that old friend. It crept in like smoke, whispering, "You left your daughter. You abandoned her." I took a sip and stared at my reflection in the black surface of the coffee. Did I abandon her? Or did she abandon me years ago and I just refused to see it? I remembered her wedding day, how radiant she looked, how proud I'd been. The way she kissed my cheek and said, "I'll always need you, Mom." She hadn't been lying. She did need me, but not for love. For convenience. For rescue. And I had given it all. Every time she fell, I built her a softer landing. Every time she burned a bridge, I built her another one. I called it love. But it wasn't love. It was fear of fear that if I stopped saving her, she'd stop needing me. I stared out the window and whispered to myself, "You didn't abandon her. You released her." Because love isn't supposed to cost your soul. And what I gave her wasn't love, it was addiction. And she had overdosed on my generosity. After breakfast, I filled up the tank and kept driving. The city fell behind me, replaced by open fields and long stretches of quiet road. My phone, still powered off in my bag, might have been vibrating, but I didn't care. Let the world spin without me. Let them panic, wonder, curse my name. Let them feel the silence they had forced me into for years. Hours passed. The road stretched endlessly ahead. And with every passing mile, I felt lighter. At one point, I laughed. Out loud. It startled me at first, the sound of it. It had been so long since I'd heard my own laughter, real laughter, the kind that isn't polite or rehearsed. It wasn't joy exactly, more like disbelief. The sound of someone realizing they've finally escaped the cage they didn't know they were in. I stopped by a lake around noon. The water was still, glistening under the pale sun. I sat on a bench and watched the ripples spread across the surface. It was peaceful. No noise. No demands. Just stillness. And yet, my mind couldn't stop returning to that box sitting in my house, the box waiting for them. I imagined it, sitting there on the table, the light from the window spilling across it. Silent, unassuming, deadly. I imagined Emily's face when she saw it. The confusion, the impatience. Her voice calling out, "Mom? Mom," as she wandered through the house, realizing it was empty. The moment she noticed the suitcase missing, the phone left behind, the note on the counter, "You'll find what you're looking for in the box." I smiled, a bitter, quiet smile. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. Let her open it. Let her see every paper, every receipt, every truth she tried to bury under guilt. Let her feel what it's like to face consequences. For years, I had been the one feeling ashamed. Now it was their turn. I closed my eyes and pictured it, the way her hands would tremble when she unfolded the first document, the way Jason's arrogance would crack into panic when he realized the house, the cars, the accounts, all of it was gone. Locked. Frozen. Owned by me. Not anymore, of course. By then, it would all be transferred to trusts and charities under James's care. There would be nothing left for them to take. They'd scream. Oh, I could almost hear it already. Not the scream of pain, but the scream of realization. The sound people make when they finally understand that the well has run dry. And I wouldn't be there to see it. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to witness their downfall. I only needed to know it was coming. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't belong to anyone else. It tasted clean. Real. By evening, I was halfway across the state. I stopped at a small motel, checked in under a different name, Marion. It was my mother's name. The one person who had taught me strength but also silence. The irony didn't escape me. I had become her in the end, quiet, distant, misunderstood. The room was plain, just a bed, a chair, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I dropped my suitcase on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the bed. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Not because I was hidden, but because I was no longer available. I ran a bath and sat in the water until it went cold. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the years I'd wasted. All the apologies I'd made for other people's sins. All the love I'd handed out like charity. And somewhere between the cooling water and the hum of the bathroom fan, I made myself a promise. Never again. Never again would I give until there was nothing left of me. Never again would I measure love by sacrifice. Never again would I let guilt be the leash that pulls me back. When I got out, I sat by the window wrapped in a towel, watching the sky turn orange and then purple. I thought of Emily again, how she would react, what she would say, how she would twist the story to make herself the victim. But for once, it didn't matter. Her version of the story no longer defined me. Mine did. I picked up the hotel notepad and wrote a single sentence. "You can't save people who enjoy drowning." I folded it and tucked it into my journal. As night fell, I turned off the lights and lay in bed. The sheets smelled like detergent and dust. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly and whispered into the dark. "Goodbye, Emily." And for the first time, I didn't mean it as a goodbye out of sadness. It was a goodbye of relief. Tomorrow, the world would wake up as it always does. Jason would drive to my house with his arrogance. Emily would walk in with her demands. And instead of me, they would find truth. The box. The documents. The silence. And somewhere miles away, in a cheap motel room, I would smile, not because they were suffering, but because I was free. That night, I slept. Not heavily, not deeply, but peacefully. No dreams, no nightmares, no memories clawing at the edges of my mind. Just quiet. Just rest. Just the sound of my own breathing, steady, alive, unafraid. Morning came, and somewhere miles away, the sun rose over that quiet street, my street. The same driveway where I once watched Emily learn to ride her first bike. The same porch where she used to run barefoot to greet me after school. Now, that same home would greet her with something else: silence. I wasn't there to see it, but I can picture it perfectly. Some memories don't come from sight. They come from intuition, from the way you know your story will unfold when you finally stop playing the victim and start becoming the consequence. They arrived mid-morning, I imagine, the way they always did, entitled, hurried, acting as if every clock in the world belonged to them. Jason would have driven, probably in that same luxury car I'd helped him finance. The one he called his investment in image. He'd park right in front of my lawn, probably not even cutting the engine before stepping out. Emily, in her usual expensive coat, heels clicking against the pavement, phone in hand, already annoyed that I wasn't at the door to greet them. I can see her face, confusion first, then irritation. She would knock once, twice. Then louder. "Mom," she'd call out, that sharp, commanding tone echoing down the empty hallway. Nothing. The wind would answer before I ever did. The stillness of the house, the locked door, the quiet garden, everything screaming a truth she couldn't understand. Jason, impatient, would walk around the porch, tug at the doorknob, muttering under his breath. Maybe he'd even kick the side of the door, as if force could open what pride had already sealed shut. Then she'd find the note, folded neatly and taped to the doorframe, just under the handle. "You'll find what you're looking for inside the box." I can see it, her hands trembling slightly as she peeled it off, reading it again and again, her mind struggling to compute the simplicity of it. She'd look at Jason, waiting for him to laugh it off, to find the punchline. But there wouldn't be one. They'd finally managed to get inside, perhaps with the spare key she'd once demanded to have for emergencies. I wonder if she paused when she stepped in. If she noticed the smell. The air without my perfume. The absence of my voice. The stillness that felt like a grave. I hope she did. Because that silence was my final message. There, in the center of the living room, right on the coffee table, the box waited, small, unassuming, patient. The sunlight from the window would have fallen across it perfectly, the golden glow framing it like something sacred. Emily would have frozen at the sight of it. Jason would have scoffed. "What the hell is this?" He'd stride forward first, confident as always, tearing the tape with his hands like a man unwrapping a gift he believed he deserved. But the moment that lid came off, their world would start to collapse. Inside, the truth waited, organized, undeniable, merciless. Receipts. Contracts. Photocopies. Bank transfers. Every single lie they had ever told me, documented and dated. Their vacations to Greece, Dubai, and France, the ones they swore they couldn't afford because of medical bills. Photos of their social media posts showing champagne glasses and beaches while I'd been wiring them emergency funds. Letters from their past employers confirming firings, lawsuits, debts, all the things they'd hidden under charm and manipulation. And at the very bottom, the legal deeds. The property title to the house they thought they owned. The one in my name. The one I had already transferred to a charity trust that very morning. When they saw that, the air must have turned heavy. Jason would have gone pale, the arrogance draining from his face like color bleeding from old paint. He'd flip through the papers, muttering, no, this can't be right. But it was. Every page, every stamp, every notarized line, all of it right. All of it real. I can imagine Emily's voice cracking, her words stumbling out between shock and rage. What is this? What is she doing? Why would she do this to us? Her tone wouldn't be sorrow. No, it would be insult. The disbelief of someone who truly believes betrayal is something done to them, never something they cause. She would search for a letter, some explanation that softened the blow. And she would find it folded on top of the final folder. It would read, "You told me family comes first. But you forgot that I am family too." I hope her hands shook when she read it. I hope the truth finally burned through the fog of entitlement she'd lived in. Jason, ever the opportunist, would start shouting. He'd blame her, of course. That's what men like him do. You pushed her too far. You shouldn't have said that last night. He'd pace, throw papers, knock over a chair. And Emily, my Emily, she'd crumble. Not from guilt, but from fear. Fear of losing what she never built herself. Fear of facing life without the safety net of my love, my money, my sacrifices. I wonder if she screamed then. If her voice cracked the way mine used to when she'd hang up on me after asking for just a little help. I wonder if she realized that this was what it felt like to be left behind. Because that was the lesson I'd left her, not punishment, but perspective. The world outside my protection isn't cruel. It's simply honest. And honesty hurts people who live on lies. I imagine Jason grabbing his phone, trying to call me. Maybe 10 times. Maybe 20. Each call going straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring becoming another brick in the wall between us. And then maybe, just maybe, he'd try to log into one of the accounts. Only to find them frozen. Every card declined. Every access denied. Because I had closed every door behind me. They would stand there, surrounded by papers, staring at the ruins of their illusion. The box, the receipts, the note, everything testifying against them. I imagine the moment Emily finally broke. The tears would come not soft, but violent. She'd collapse onto the floor, her sobs echoing through the house like the cries of a child who finally realizes her mother isn't coming back. Jason would curse, yell, blame everyone but himself. Maybe he'd even storm out, slamming the door behind him, leaving her alone in that silence. And in that silence, she'd finally meet herself. Not the glamorous, untouchable woman she showed the world, but the girl beneath the greed. The girl who lost her mother not because of money, but because she confused love with ownership. That's the part that hurts the most when I picture it. Because I know, deep down, the moment she realized I was truly gone, she felt it. The absence. The void where my voice used to be. The silence that followed her name when she said, Mom. And that's the moment I was waiting for, not revenge, not suffering, but awareness. The moment when she'd finally understand that I wasn't punishing her. I was freeing myself. And maybe, just maybe, freeing her too. I can see her now, hours later, still sitting on the floor, the papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. The sun would have shifted, the shadows stretching across the room. She'd pick up that note again, reading it over and over. Her makeup smudged, her eyes swollen, her heart cracking under the weight of something unfamiliar, accountability. Maybe she'd whisper my name then. Softly. Mom. And for once, she wouldn't be calling for help. She'd be calling out of longing, out of realization, out of grief. Jason wouldn't come back that night. I know him too well. Men like him don't stick around when the money's gone. He'd pack a bag, call his contacts, disappear into whatever hole he crawled out of. And she'd be left alone in the house she thought she owned, surrounded by proof that she never really had anything that wasn't given. I wonder if she went in my room that night. If she sat on my bed, looked at my pillow, breathed in the faint scent that lingered there. If she realized that for the first time in her life, she couldn't call me to fix it. That I was gone, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. Maybe she finally understood that when love is taken for granted long enough, it doesn't die, it leaves. Quietly. Without warning. I didn't need to be there to see any of it. Because I could feel it. I could feel the energy shift, like a bond snapping after years of being stretched too thin. It didn't bring me joy, not the kind that makes you smile. It brought me peace, the deep, painful kind that comes when you finally stop bleeding for people who keep cutting you. That evening, as I sat in a small hotel hundreds of miles away, I looked out the window and whispered to the wind. They've opened the box by now. And in that moment, I felt it, the release. The severing of something that had chained me for far too long. There's a strange serenity in knowing justice doesn't always come from courts or karma. Sometimes, justice comes in the form of absence, the silence that follows when someone finally realizes you're not coming back. That night, I slept better than I had in years. And when I dreamed, I didn't see her face full of anger or tears. I saw her as a child again, running in the garden, laughing innocent. The daughter I once had, the one I will always love, but no longer save. It didn't take long for the world to start closing in on them. You can always tell when people who've lived on illusion finally collide with reality. It's never quiet. It's loud, chaotic, desperate. By the third day, the silence that had once filled my house turned into their panic. I wasn't there to see it, but I could feel it like static in the air. It's strange how distance doesn't dull certain connections. A mother always feels the storm, even when she's standing under another sky. The calls came first. Dozens of them. I didn't hear them, of course. My phone was gone, left behind deliberately like a skin I no longer wanted to wear. But I could imagine every voicemail, every frantic tone, every shift from entitlement to fear. Mom, please call me back. Where are you? Jason's freaking out. We need to talk. And then, inevitably, the one that came after silence set in. How could you do this to us? It was almost poetic. The same question I had asked in my heart for years. How could they do this to me? How could she, my child, my blood, look at me not as a person, but as a solution? And now, the question had come home to her. Full circle. By the end of that first week, everything began to unravel. Jason's debts came crawling out from every corner of his hidden life. I'd known it would happen. He wasn't clever, just lucky, and his luck had always been funded by my silence. When the accounts froze, so did his charm. When the credit dried up, so did the people who once called him friend. I imagine him storming through the house, shouting, demanding explanations from Emily that she didn't have. She never understood money, not really. To her, money was just air. Always there, invisible but constant. She had no idea what it was like to earn it, to chase it, to sacrifice for it. And now, suddenly, she was suffocating without it. I picture her crying in the kitchen, the same place where I used to teach her how to bake when she was little. Her tears falling on the cold countertop, surrounded by luxury appliances that couldn't feed her without a balance in her account. The world has a cruel way of teaching lessons. It doesn't scream. It just takes away. The first thing they lost was the car, repossessed within days. Then the jewelry, sold in desperation. Then the house, legally transferred out of their control. And with every loss, their pride cracked a little more. I can almost hear her voice, full of disbelief. She wouldn't really do this to us, would she? As if my kindness had been her property. As if love were an endless inheritance she could drain without consequence. But I did. I did it because love without boundaries isn't love, it's servitude. Jason tried to fight it, of course. He went to the bank, to the lawyers, to anyone who'd listen. But the papers were airtight. James had made sure of it. Every cent they thought they had was legally redirected, every asset rerouted to the foundations I'd named. There was nothing left for them to touch. He must have realized, then, that I'd been preparing for this far longer than he'd known. And that's what terrified him most, the quiet planning, the patience of a woman who'd been underestimated one too many times. Men like Jason only understand two languages, control and collapse. And when control slips through their fingers, they crumble. I imagine the shouting, the slammed doors, the smashed glass. The venom of blame. He would have called her names, thrown her failures at her like stones. And she, in her panic, would have turned to me, except I wasn't there anymore. For the first time in her life, my daughter had to stand alone. Maybe she went to my lawyer. Maybe she showed up at James's office, demanding explanations, waving her hands, threatening to sue, to expose, to shame me publicly. But James is an old friend. Steady. Calm. Untouchable. He would have slid the folder across his desk, his voice even. Your mother acted within full legal rights. You have no claim to her estate. I can almost hear her disbelief. Her estate? She's not dead. And James, with that cold professionalism I had once admired, would have said, she's alive. But she's done. Those words would have hit her harder than any death notice ever could. Because I wasn't gone. I was simply unreachable. And sometimes that's worse. When someone dies, you grieve and move on. But when someone chooses to leave, you're forced to live with the weight of what drove them away. I know she must have broken down in that office. I know she must have screamed, cried, begged for information. But James wouldn't have given her any. Just a final statement. Your mother said to tell you she's at peace. She doesn't need to be found. Those were my exact words. My final message. I didn't want her chasing me. Because this wasn't a game of hide and seek. It was a burial. I had buried the version of me that enabled her. In the days that followed, I imagined she stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The panic would have turned to grief and the grief to shame. Not all at once, shame never comes cleanly. It comes in waves, soft at first, then brutal. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for her phone to call me, forgetting that the number was useless now. She'd see my name on old text threads and reread my messages, the ones where I said, "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll help you." And maybe she'd start realizing how many times those words had been her lifeline. Jason, by then, would be gone, I have no doubt. Men like him always leave when the money runs out. He probably packed his bags in the middle of the night, muttering something about starting fresh. He wouldn't even look back. And maybe that's when it finally hit her, the truth I had known all along. She hadn't married love. She'd married opportunity. And when opportunity dried up, love went with it. I don't take pleasure in imagining her pain. Despite everything, she's still my daughter. But I do take comfort in knowing she's finally tasting the truth. That's the only justice that ever mattered to me, not revenge, not punishment, but truth. It's strange how peaceful justice can feel when you've carried pain long enough. It doesn't roar. It doesn't dance. It just breathes. I sat one evening by the ocean, watching the waves crash against the rocks, the foam glistening under the setting sun. And I thought about her. About how life would reshape her now that the safety net was gone. Maybe she'd find strength. Maybe she'd hate me forever. Maybe both. But either way, she'd finally have to become her own person, not an extension of mine. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small seashell, one I'd picked up on the beach when she was a child. She used to collect them with me, running along the shore, her laughter mixing with the sound of the tide. I held it between my fingers and whispered, "This was always supposed to be yours." But I kept it too long. Then I threw it into the sea. Watched it vanish into the endless water. Just like I had vanished from her life. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. No one died. But something inside me finally lived. The next day, I received a message, not from her, but from James. He simply wrote, "It's done. They've signed the release. The accounts are closed." And beneath that, another line. She asked if you're happy. Happy. The word felt strange in my mouth. I wasn't happy. Not the way people mean it. Happiness is a flame, fragile, fleeting. What I felt was steadier than that. It was peace. A quiet, unshakable peace. For years, I'd mistaken love for peace. I thought loving her, endlessly, blindly, would bring me peace. But peace doesn't come from giving everything. It comes from finally having nothing left to give. I took a walk along the pier that evening, my scarf fluttering in the wind. The sky was soft and pink, the kind of beauty you can only notice when you're no longer drowning. And I realized something. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. I pitied her. Because she would spend years trying to understand how a mother's love could coexist with this kind of distance. But the truth is simple. Love without limits becomes destruction. And sometimes the only way to love someone who keeps hurting you is to disappear. So yes, I vanished. And yes, I left her with nothing but truth. And that truth became her reckoning. Justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like silence, absence, consequence. Sometimes it's just a woman sitting by the ocean, finally breathing without guilt. And that woman was me. Morning sunlight spilled across the hotel curtains like mercy. Soft, forgiving, golden. It felt almost cruel, how gentle the world could look after so much storm. I lay there for a long time, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The silence was unfamiliar. Not the kind that followed shouting or grief, but the kind that felt earned. The kind that hummed with the quiet dignity of survival. For years, I had woken up to the weight of someone else's expectations. Every morning began with a call, a worry, a responsibility that wasn't mine to carry. Now there was nothing. No phone buzzing, no voice demanding, "Mom, can you help?" Just the rhythmic sound of my own breath and the soft creak of the old ceiling fan. I smiled, and it surprised me. It wasn't joy, it was recognition. I had survived myself. I got up, opened the window, and let the light flood in. The air smelled of salt and rain, a mixture that always reminded me of beginnings. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, shimmering under the early sun. I thought about how fitting it was that I had ended up here, by the sea. The same sea where I had once taken Emily as a child. The same sea she'd laughed beside, building castles out of sand that the tide always washed away. Everything she'd built was like that, beautiful for a moment, fragile by nature, gone with the next wave. And I had spent my entire life rebuilding those castles for her. This time, I had let the tide win. I sat on the small balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping the bitter coffee I'd made in the hotel pot. It wasn't good, but it was mine. Everything now was mine. My time, my quiet, my choices. For the first time in decades, my life belonged to me. It's strange how heavy freedom can feel when you first hold it. Everyone imagines it will feel light, like flight, like release. But at first, it feels dense, thick with realization, heavy with the ghosts of all the years you gave away. Every breath carries the echo of an old chain falling off. I thought of Emily then, of course. How could I not? She had been the axis my world spun around for so long that even now, distance couldn't erase her from my thoughts. But thinking of her no longer hurt. It just existed. Like a scar healed, but still there. I wondered what she was doing. If she was sleeping, if she had eaten, if she'd stopped crying. I wondered if she hated me, or if she finally understood. Part of me hoped she still hated me, because hate at least meant she was alive. Understanding comes later, much later, when the anger has burned itself out and all that's left is the truth. People always imagine that when a mother walks away, she must be heartless. But the truth is, walking away is the hardest form of love there is. It's the moment when you decide that enabling someone's destruction is no longer mercy. It's when you understand that love isn't always staying. Sometimes it's the courage to leave. I had spent too many years confusing love with rescue. Every time Emily stumbled, I ran to catch her. Every time she failed, I cushioned the fall. And in doing so, I taught her that the ground would never hurt, that no matter how recklessly she fell, I would be there to break it for her. I called it devotion. But what I gave her was immunity from consequence, from growth, from herself. That was my greatest mistake. And now, walking away was my greatest correction. By noon, I went out for a walk along the shoreline. The sand was cool under my feet, the waves brushing against my ankles with the soft insistence of memory. There were people scattered across the beach, families, couples, children building their temporary kingdoms of sand. I smiled at them, not out of envy, but out of recognition. Every generation learns the same truth differently. Love too tightly, and you smother. Hold too loosely, and you lose. But hold forever, and you break. I walked until the beach thinned out, until there was no one around but me and the ocean. That's when I finally let myself speak out loud. My voice was rough and used, but honest. I did what I had to, I said to the waves. and I don't regret it. The wind carried my words away, scattering them into the endless horizon. And I realized I didn't need forgiveness, not from Emily, not from the world, not even from myself. Because forgiveness implies wrong, and I hadn't done wrong. I had done what mothers are never taught to do. I had chosen myself. For so long, I believed that a good mother was the one who never stopped giving. But now I knew the truth. A good mother also knows when to stop. When to say no. When to close the door gently and walk away with her dignity intact. That afternoon, I found a small bookstore tucked behind a row of cafes. It smelled like paper and dust, the scent of peace. I bought a blank journal, its cover soft and plain, and a pen. When I returned to the hotel, I sat down by the window and began to write. Not to explain. Not to justify. Just to remember. I wrote about my childhood, about the woman I used to be before life hardened me. I wrote about Emily's birth, how small she was, how her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. I wrote about the first time she said, "Mama," and the way her voice made me believe I had finally found purpose. And then I wrote about the slow decay, how love had turned into obligation, how my generosity had been weaponized against me. Each word felt like pulling glass from an old wound. Painful, but necessary. And when I reached the last page, I didn't end it with bitterness. I ended it with truth. I wasn't abandoning my daughter. I was freeing myself from her chains. Because sometimes love is not holding tighter, it's letting go before you both drown. I closed the journal and placed it beside the window. Outside, the sky was changing again, soft hues of orange and purple painting the horizon. I thought of all the evenings I had spent waiting for her to call. Now, I didn't wait for anyone. And that stillness, that quiet expectation of nothing, was the purest form of peace I had ever known. Later, as the night deepened, I made myself tea and sat on the bed with the lights off. I watched the moon through the glass, silver and solemn, reflected in the sea. The sound of the waves became a lullaby, steady and endless. And I whispered, softly but firmly, "I forgive you, Emily." Not because you asked, but because I need to move forward. Forgiveness isn't absolution. It's release. It's unclenching the fist that's been holding pain for too long and realizing it's empty now. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the memories drift, all the good ones, all the bad ones. I didn't try to separate them anymore. They were all part of me. And I realized something so simple, it almost made me laugh. I had been chasing freedom all my life, not knowing that freedom doesn't come from leaving others. It comes from finally coming home to yourself. The next morning, I packed my bag again, not out of fear this time, but out of readiness. I didn't know where I was going next. Maybe another town, maybe another coast. But it didn't matter. For once, I wasn't running from something. I was walking toward myself. Before I left, I wrote one final note on the inside cover of my journal. The greatest gift you can give someone entitled is the chance to face reality without you. Then I smiled. Because it was true, brutally, beautifully true. As I closed the hotel door behind me, I looked back one last time. The room was tidy, calm, untouched like a page that had finally been written on after years of being blank. I walked out into the morning sun. The breeze lifted my hair, warm against my face. And I whispered to no one in particular, "This is what peace feels like." I didn't need applause. I didn't need understanding. I just needed this moment, the one where the story ended not with vengeance or tragedy, but with quiet survival. Because I had learned the most painful truth of all. Love is not measured by how much you give, but by how much of yourself you refuse to lose. And so I walked. Barefoot. Unburdened. Alive.